it was time for you to have the talk. You know the one. So, why don't you just take a seat and let's just get together and have this discussion. Whether you know about it or not, we're going to go through it entirely with you in the way that we think is most important. Let's talk about Dragon's Dogma. So, Dragon's Dogma is the greatest game of all time. And I'm going to tell you exactly why without ever opening up the game and referencing only literary constructs exclusively. Literary will also be entailing things such as multimedia, video game mechanics, and illustrative aspects, which could include things like UI, dialogue, and art. So, let's begin. Who am I kidding? I can't play the dad look. Don't sue me. Get this out of here. It just makes me feel all nasty. Alright. Let's begin. Dragon's Dogma. Greatest game of all time. I can tell you so with the following. For starters, I must begin by stating that I will not be including anything to do with the advertismal manga, because the advertismal manga is exclusively that. It's a piece of garbage that ultimately served no purpose, and I will not be including the anime, because the anime is bad. Not just a little bit bad, it is bad. It is atrocious. Don't watch the Dragon's Dogma anime. Berserk fans, though I am not a huge fan of Berserk myself, I must respect it due to its ability to push particular concepts forward that didn't have a place prior to its existence. And Berserk fans would understand that the Berserk adaptation to an anime cartoon in 2016, I think, was a smack in the face to what everything that Berserk fans enjoyed. Apparently, so anyone who read the Berserk manga or who watched, I think, like the old Berserk animes, I'm not entirely educated on Berserk. I'm not really into things that do the horny. So, either way, the parallel that I'm trying to make is that the Berserk 2016 adaptation is to the original Berserk, as to the anime Dragon's Dogma is to the game. Dragon's Dogma was created with far more prowess, and the people who made the anime clearly were of a far lower caliber of art comprehension. The thing that made Dragon's Dogma, I just need to hold this, the thing that made Dragon's Dogma so good clearly went so far over the manga and anime writers' heads that they had absolutely no idea how to portray it in a similar style. And I'm going to tell you exactly why after I lowered the music, because the music is obnoxiously loud. Where's my... Chill out. Calm down. There you go. Alright. Thanks for that, George. Can you hear me now? Can you hear everything that I'm supposed to say to you? Could you hear everything that I was saying? I will review it immediately. Dragon's Dogma anime bad. It's like Berserk 2016 is to the Berserk manga, but it's to this video game instead. That's the whole entire thing I was going to say. So, here is why. I'm going to start off with the primary element, my introductive argument, discussing as to why this was not given a treatment when it was attempted to be adapted. Gamers, in general, are stupid. Now, is this an offensive statement to gamers? No, not exactly. But what I can tell you is that most of them are not educated on things like archaeology, anthropology, cultural history, history in general, the way that the whole entire world worked. In fact, I have had many rants regarding Ubisoft and their complete disrespect for history as it actually is, so that they are instead able to facilitate to their audience who thinks they know history, thinks they know what was important to value and portray in recreations, but they had no idea, and they continue not to have an idea because they have a completely different priority set of selling games to people who will buy them religiously, not making art like Dragon's Dogma. In regards to, anthropology, cultural history and all that, this is clearly a work of fiction. Not just a work of fiction, but it's not even based off of anything. Dragon's Dogma is its own distinct IP. So how in the world can it be respecting history and anthropology? This is where we start going into big literature land. So, history became legend, legend became myth, and for 2,500 years, actually no, it was more like 1,300 years, somewhere around there, Beowulf got translated and retranslated and retranslated, not necessarily by language, but by bard to bard to bard, individual to individual to individual, reusing it, rehashing it, and remaking it, ultimately turning into not this. This is a hilarious bastardization of Beowulf in the English language, because the English language cannot successfully express what's even going on here. But you know what Beowulf inspired? A guy named Tolkien. Tolkien was a big boy genius. Tolkien was a big boy who studied this stuff to the core, to the point where it actually was a core element of what he used to inspire the whole entire point of The Lord of the Rings. Now, excuse me while I try and figure out how to put all these in the right places. I'm just going to leave them there. It's fine. You know what? No, I'm going to make a big stack of all the books that I talk about, and I'm going to sift through the books every single time just to be a dork, because you can't stop me. We're here to prove points, not be whatever you call it, not be. Okay, so Tolkien studied Beowulf. Now, here is the particular element. As I was discussing, gamers are dumb. They do not understand what makes a piece of historical literature often valuable. There are probably a lot of literary artists that are also gamers that probably value things like maybe Shakespeare or maybe Sun Tzu, who's the guy that made the Odyssey? Homer. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of things about these pieces that is translatable by modern standards because they are Greco. Even Sun Tzu is Greco, even though it's Chinese. And when I say Greco, I mean it's a very particular logical process of thought that sort of turns the brain into a computer, going through a series of yes and no questions to sort of avenue their way to a conclusion, regardless what cultural or historical elements are available or not. Beowulf is not like this. Beowulf is not like this, and it makes it a superior piece because when you review these other stories and whatnot, while they are exquisite within their own rights, they are completely, once again, bastardized by the modern audiences who praise them, because modern audiences who praise them almost never actually understand what's truly going on within the whole entire circumstance of things. in many circumstances. For instance, there is a guy named Lindy Page, shout out to my boy, who did a quick little lecture on a completely alternative perspective of the Siege of Troy, I think, in regards to how the story was substantially less about the siege of a city and fantastical retelling of the way that things may or may not have happened, if they happened at all, but instead about a son who brought the emotions of a father to their knees, and regardless of being on opposite sides of the war, completely understood one another and were able to come together as humans. And then let history pass as it will. You look at that kind of perspective, you don't really see people talking about that. Why? Because, well, most likely it's because you only read, the Siege of Troy and that whole entire thing from Homer just because you had to read it in school at some point. Chances are you also already read Beowulf in school at some point as well. It's in some curriculums, I don't know if it still is. But simultaneously, Beowulf is far more incomprehensible than anything Homer ever made because it is based off of a completely alternative logic system, which, as I said, Homer and writings of similar feel were very, logical in their avenues of understanding the story, whereas Beowulf is a completely different animal. In fact, we got to a point where Beowulf was finally getting its legitimate translations within a particular period of time that Tolkien was a professor. Hold on, let me double check to make sure that I actually get my dates right. When was Beowulf translated into modern English? Yep, 1805. Modern English into 1805. Now, Tolkien, let's see here, was a professor. This was like in 19-something. Substantially later. But either way, during the time that Tolkien was a professor, there were things like professor, or what do you call it? Magazines. I'm sorry, I'm butchering all the specific nomenclature, but there were basically magazines being published. Some in regards to higher class individuals, like with high educations, and there were a lot of people who started exposing their criticisms regarding Beowulf. As Beowulf was translated into the modern English and widely distributed and people had access to it, people started criticizing it for being this weird conceptual piece of garbage that really didn't have any value on the classical literature set because it did not follow the same logical process of thinking and understanding that lasts through the test of time as something like Homer's pieces do. And then Tolkien stepped in. And was like, excuse me, I think not. And one of the most profound things that he has ever written outside of Lord of the Rings is as follows. This is in regards to the critics of Beowulf. None of this is as true as Beowulf, as it used to be called. I have, of course, read the Beowulf, as have most, but not all, of those who have criticized it. But I fear that unworthy successor and beneficiary Joseph Bosworth, who is another critic, I have not been a man so diligent in my special walk as duly to read that has been printed on or touching on this poem. So, Tolkien is pretty much saying he knows a lot, but he doesn't know everything. But I read enough, I think, to venture the opinion that Beowulfiana, which is the original name, is, while rich in many departments, especially poor in one: poor in criticism. Criticism that is directed to the understanding of a poem as a poem. It has been said of Beowulf itself that its weakness lies in placing the unimportant things at the center and the important things on the outer edges. This is one of the opinions that I specifically wish to consider. I think it profoundly untrue of the poem, but strikingly true of the literature about it. Beowulf has been used as a quarry of fact and fancy far more assiduously than it has been studied as a work of art. As I was saying, people were looking at Beowulf the same way that they were looking at the Odyssey. And naturally, that was a problem. That was a problem because predominantly English meaning like in England and other similar English-speaking countries, sort of revered a sort of Greco lineage logic, meaning that like they thought, the high English, the grand imperial English, they're the ones that think with this logistical logic and big brain power and all that. No, they did not. They thought in this very artistic form prior to being sort of expanded upon by multiple cultures that sort of all imbued themselves together to sort of become the Latin uprising in the north, and then the Saxon uprising from the south. Was it Saxon? No, Normand uprising from the south, and then the Saxon uprising in the middle. With all that being said, the point that I'm trying to make is that critics often observed, and likely would continue to observe without any prior understanding, that Beowulf is a poem that just kind of like there's a dude who kills a weird goblin-looking thing, and then kills its mom, and then kills a dragon. Who cares? What value does this story have? Might I remind you that The Lord of the Rings is about a short dude dropping a ring into a volcano. What is happening to my music right now? Chill. This is not the time for these sorts of shenanigans. Bro, what the heck? What in the world? What in the world was that nonsense? Not on my watch. You get back to the way you were. So, as I was saying, where was I? Right. Look. Can you stop, please? Why are you like this? Why are you like this? Oh, that's not why you're like this. That's not why you're like this at all. Hold on. Okay, everything is breaking right now, so I'm gonna talk to you guys while just tries to die on me for some reason, which is really cool. Really, really cool. Oh my gosh, wow, like everything's genuinely trying to die on me. That's fascinating. Okay, so what brought on this rant? I have no idea why it's doing this. It's like, there you go, I fixed it. Okay, what brought on this rant? I have been discussing Dragon's Dogma for a very long time. In fact, I have written entire papers about sections that expand anywhere between 2 minutes and 1 second. I have written an entire essay on 1 second, the first second that Dragon's Dogma, Dark Arisen, opens up. A single chord that occurs in Dragon's Dogma is able to sort of introduce you to what's going to happen and reference everything that has happened to everyone that knows what's already going to happen, which I must remember. I think I didn't mention it in my... I found where I was... I put one of the books on the space bar. That would explain why the music got weird. Anyways, so... as I was saying, Lord of the Rings is about a short dude that threw a whatever you call it, threw a ring into a volcano. That's it. Now, Dragon's Dogma is about a dude, you, the player, who got attacked by a dragon on a beach. It stole your heart, and now you have to get your heart back by any means necessary, likely meaning killing the dragon. So basically, the dragon stole your heart and you're gonna kill it. That's the entire story. Notice a key similarity between these three pieces of literature is that their premises can be summarized in less than a sentence. Expanding on the premise can be used in an entire sentence if so desired. That is the power of these premises. Now, the second element, like I said, gamers are usually dumb. In regards to the critics of Beowulf, most critics were regarding, hey, this isn't Greco logic, I don't understand this stuff, why in the world would this be considered good? Tolkien stepped up and said, excuse me, you don't understand how people expressed themselves in a previous time. Beowulf is not about a dude that killed three things. Beowulf is about the passing of an age, the ending of heroes, the transition between the pagan world and the Christian one. This was like an expression of like this was the last great hero of the olden days before the god of the Christians rose up and made the world not in need of men as heroes anymore. The transitions from heroes to martyrs, and it's like a loss of a great time in transition to a more peaceful one. Now let's talk about Dragon's Dogma. So Dragon's Dogma has exquisitely similar elements in which spoilers, the book, the story, the game has absolutely little, if anything, to do with the actual combat between you, the main character, and the dragon. Instead, almost exclusively, like all of these other pieces of literature, all had to do with what the people that were at the mercy of this circumstance decided to do with the problem that was in front of them. Now, there is a massive criticism of Tolkien that Sauron was not a very relatable bad guy. No shit. What gave you that idea? Now, the brilliance of that a lot of people fail to understand is that, you see, hang on, we're about to get the important point. You can't just step on me like that, camera, focus, come on, alright, the important part about that, you see, you foolish camera, is that a story is not about the enemy. The story is about the people who are fighting them. Now, if you make a relatable enemy, the enemy isn't really an enemy anymore. The enemy is a guy with opposite objectives to your main character, which is a completely different story, which ultimately creates a lesser story because it's no longer about people. It's about concepts. It's about principles, not about concepts and principles being the guidelines of what someone chooses to or not to do. Tolkien knew this, and a lot of authors to this day still don't, which is ridiculous, but, not entirely ununderstandable. Now, the irony of that is that there are a lot of pieces of literature that people praise with high honors that are completely disregarding the exact same concepts that Tolkien goes through in regards to Sauron being this big baddie. Because again, a story is not about the big baddie. A story is about the people who have to make decisions because of the struggle that they're all going through. Some people will make the right decisions, some people will make the wrong decisions, some people will make decisions based off of self-gain exclusively, some self-sacrifice, some survival, etc., etc. You ever heard of, those really, really popular shows like Breaking Bad, The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones? The ones that hit the top of the charts for at least a period of time before they either shelved off into obscurity or ended, depending on... I never watched any of them, but I can tell you one thing for certain. Who was the bad guy in The Walking Dead? Oh right, I forgot, it was zombies. It was a virus. It was a completely ambiguous concept that everyone had to struggle with and figure out what to do about. What was the enemy in Game of Thrones? Oh right, winter. A season. There is this unstoppable force that is coming. Winter is coming, and everyone has to figure out what to do about it. And everybody's making their own decisions, whether it be for themselves or for not. And then, what was the other one that I mentioned? Game of Thrones, Walking Dead. Oh yeah, and Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad, completely different premise, completely different story style, completely different everything. What's the primary enemy there? Cancer. The primary enemy is cancer. Breaking Bad is about a guy who is trying everything in his power to do something to make sure that he is able to sustain his family after he dies of cancer. All of these shows, all of these award-winning, critically acclaimed, everybody loves them things, all circumvent around these abstract concepts being the primary antagonist, which is the elements of a successful story, because stories aren't about the enemies. The stories are about the people who decide to do what they do because of those enemies. Dragon's Dogma. We discuss once again. Dragon's Dogma has absolutely nothing to do with the dragon, although you get to learn about him all the same if you pay attention. But you don't have to. You can go through the entire story, have no idea what the deal with the dragon is, and move on, because you understand enough. Spoilers for the following statement. In Dragon's Dogma, there is a cycle in which two characters are constantly being recycled over and over again after every so many generations. I don't remember how many. I think it might just be one generation. I do not recall. But the point is, the character, the dragon, becomes reincarnated as another individual who sort of takes the position of the dragon by failing with their sort of moral battle against the dragon, because the dragon has absolutely nothing to do with being an antagonist. The dragon is merely a forefront for testing the will of mankind. That's it. And ironically, the dragon also is the one in control, not the person who gets reincarnated as it. So you get this person who's sort of like a fuel, a soul fuel for this demonic incursion that cannot control whether or not they cause problems for the protagonist who is assigned to defeat them, the person whose heart is taken. They just have to sit there and watch. Sorry, did you just say you watched the anime? Don't watch the anime, it's bad. You lose. Good day, sir. As I was, oh yeah, and then there's the Seneschal, the Maker, etc. Basically, there's this character that overwatches the world, and this other character who is the Seneschal, the Maker. When someone succeeds against the moral dilemma that the dragon proposes, they get to take the place, or they get the opportunity to take the place of the previous Seneschal. So it's like one soul becomes the fuel for like a chaotic a chaotic power, while one gets used as fuel for a divine power. Which in itself is a beautiful concept, which will bring me into my next point. Japan, Shinto culture, a very heavy emphasis on cycles and whatnot, versus sort of like, let's see, it's not exactly Gothic, but it's like Frankish culture, which is very set in stone, one after another. The combination of these two concepts is idyllically impossible, but paradoxically symbiotic in nature because of the way that they are combined. How are they combined? Let me tell you. Alright, so, you see, Dragon's Dogma is a game that I will reference my point to shortly. I'm going to refer, as I was previously, to the concept of translation and retranslation, passing down between individuals, trying to keep history. There is a game of telephone that occurs within societies that do not prioritize oral history. When oral history is discussed with cultures that prefer written history, oral history gets completely skewed. And even in those elements of written history, usually written history has high aspects of propaganda, which makes it so that you have to sift through the propaganda of what was true and what was something that they were sort of told to write to glorify a particular individual. History is written by the victors sort of thing and all that. Now, with Western cultures, there are a lot of Western cultures that did not prioritize oral history, making it so that this game of telephone occurred. In the Eastern world, the Northeastern world, such as places like Japan, this also was an element of history, in which written records were the priority, as opposed to oral ones. Now, there are other cultures, for instance, like tribes in southeastern regions, particularly, who have exquisite oral history. However, Dragon's Dogma does not reference any of those cultures. They are a Western designed culture created by an Eastern culture. I'm now going to bounce real quick on a side tangent regarding Warhammer 40k. Why do people love Warhammer 40k? I'm going to tell you. It's because it is a perfect example of this game of telephone creating something completely different that you could have never created in the first place if you were to stick to the original material. Warhammer 40,000 is based off of Warhammer Fantasy as a joke to put all these fantasy characters in space. As time progressed, they prioritized this concept of telephone to be an element of the canonical lore in 40,000, meaning that the company, Games Workshop, that made Warhammer 40,000 were capable of redesigning the story as they saw fit to retcon, quote-unquote, older things and bring in newer things. However, the older things could be still considered possibly true. However, the irony is that within the story of Warhammer 40,000, that is considered old information, where it's a presumed concept of straight facts that was misinterpreted over thousands of years of time via mistranslation, misinformation, and bad documentation. What a genius concept. Now, in real-world anthropology, this occurs so very frequently. Dragon's Dogma is actually a product of this, as is Beowulf. And, in a manner of speaking, so is Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is a sort of rehashing of all these different concepts valued within Western folk tales that predated like dates of like Greco literacy, meaning that like there was set people who were like instructed with documentation prior to that element. That's what Lord of the Rings actually is. Dragon's Dogma has a very similar aspect to it, but in real time. Dragon's Dogma was originally supposed to be a Final Fantasy clone, which can be proven with an illustration that was presented in the early stages of development. That I can find by stalling before I get to the page, which is somewhere in here. And now that I have committed to exposing it, I can't not show it, because if I did, I'd be silly. I'm almost there, I swear. Going through a bunch of different costumes and whatnot. There you go, boom. Look at this picture. How well can you see this picture? You can see it decently well. Look at this picture. If you can look at this picture can be easily synonymized with something that might come out of Final Fantasy 8, 9? I think somewhere around those lines. You know, one of the bad ones. So, you see, it was originally supposed to be a Final Fantasy clone, but as production progressed, they had, some flukes and, things like IP and game mechanics in which made it so that the movement of those ideas didn't really come to fruition, as well as what was being popularized at the same time, yada, yada, yada. A bunch of intentions of people changed what Dragon's Dogma was going to be to what it became. And then they had so much, they had so much lore that they had to basically just know for themselves and leave to the imagination. Leave to the imagination. Oh, come on, where is it? Oh, there it is. Oh, I don't know if you can see that. Leave to the imagination. For instance, you can't even see that. What if I move it closer? Nope, you can't see that at all. Okay, so just use your intuition to deduce that this is an entire written language that they never even really used in the game. It was used a few times, but the only really real reason that it was used was to be aesthetical at the most. But they had entire elements of lore that they have thrown into this that they basically had to scrap. But they didn't actually scrap it entirely. They kept it in the world, but they kept it ambiguous, as though an individual was having to scrape up the history of time with a completely unknown perspective. So, specifically, there's a place in Dragon's Dogma called the Water Temple. It is this underground cave that is full of, water. Who would have guessed? But it was a place where the ancient deities of the elements were previously worshipped, but those places have been long abandoned. But when you arrive there, there's absolutely no context to what that is, and you have no idea what to do with this place at all, except for there's just a bunch of slabs of stone there with some fancy words on them that apparently have some value to somebody who can maybe interpret them and do something with it. Only afterwards do you do all of this are you able to dissect what really happened and what this place's significance really was, through the help of pawns who are basically eternal subjects that help the guy that loses his heart, called the Arisen, over the different generations of time. And they were around when these things were initially worshipped. And so they're able to sort of give you a sort of basis on what they were what the space was intended to be to start off with. However, the sort of discovery, the sort of sense of discovery that is synonymous with Egyptian archaeologists, I would state in particular, where they uncover these tombs, uncover these particular places. I would like to wager that the same can be said for like Chinese tombs, but I feel like it doesn't quite have the same level of similarity to it. Meaning, like when you uncovered, when people uncovered Asian tombs, they tended to be these glorious specters. They either tended to be like, this is an emperor or this is not. Whereas in Egypt, there's this official, there's this official, there's this official, there's this important person, that important person, etc., etc. And the structures themselves were less of a tomb and more of a unique dome to express a particular belief system. That sort of thing was more about what this water temple was able to successfully represent. Now, speaking of old things sometimes are better than new things. I can explain thusly. Beowulf, let's reference this once again. If you read it in modern English, you will not understand what the heck is going on. Even like if you're able to understand the concept of what's happening, the underlying brevity of poetry completely gets lost in translation, because there's so much particularly used language that was meant to express things subliminally in the same way modern poetry might. That when you translate it to a completely different languages, the metaphors and figures of speech just get totally lost. For instance, one of the particular notes that Tolkien uses to express like a massive difference in translation is that the word for skin, meaning like body, the word for body, in the language that Beowulf was initially written in, is soul cage. It was like literally the word for flesh translated to soul cage or heart cage, which created this inference, which could be exposed through the context clues of the work. How do you explain it? That the way that people portrayed the body within the time period that Beowulf was written was sort of like as something that they are waiting to escape. Like, you could never have determined that from the English translation. Like even if it were to say something like, "Ah, yes, my body which I wish to escape," it's like it does not even remotely translate the same as something like my soul cage which I await to set free. Now, are there better translations of it in English? Perhaps, but ultimately it would be better just to read it in the original language to get the entire contextual meaning, similar to books like the Bible in all of its Jewish and Greek aspects. That also like it's Proto-Greek and Proto-Judaeus, Hebrew, pre-Hebrew, Old Hebrew. Anyways, where was I going with this? Heart pit, soul cage, old language. Old sometimes is better than new. Expressing thusly as follows. Here I have a translation of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations from the from the olden times, from a very long time ago, from 1945. This is a printing of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations from 1945. This is a printing of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations from 2014. This one sucks. This one sucks because there's a particular element of modern culture and the choices that people use in order to try and express ideas that does not resonate with the type of cultures that were trying to express their own ideas. This type of language was able to express exactly what Marcus Aurelius was trying to speak, and did so with a very successful expression. It could be argued that it was simply a thing of the time, given as, if you didn't notice, Tolkien was alive during a very similar time period and wrote in a similar fashion as this is written. Let's find an example, shall we? Let's go to start of book 3. Why not? Book 3, first book, the third book. Alright, here we go. Let's listen to the two different translations. So this one, of its time, right, that's the thing I was going to say, is like, it could be argued that this one is a superior translation because this was like the height of Greco-thinking, as I was referencing constantly, Greco-thinking, this logical concept. And Marcus Aurelius was someone who lived during the height of his own period of Greco-thinking as a Roman ruler. And this is one from a couple of dipshits who rewrote the book thinking that they were cool. Let's see here. Yeah. Do I actually have the right book? Hold on, let me triple check. Yes, I do. Alright. Translation 1. We ought to remember not only that our life is daily wasting away and a small part of life of it is left, but also that if a man should live longer, it is quite uncertain whether his mind will stay strong enough to understand things and retain the power of contemplation to strive after knowledge of the divine and the human. Verses. A man must not only consider how the daily life wasteth and decreaseth, but this also, that if he live long, he cannot be certain whether his understanding shall continue so able and sufficient for either discreet consideration in matter of business or for contemplation, it being the thing whereon true knowledge of things both divine and human doth depend. So let me get this straight. These individuals decided, hey, you know what, the closest translation is going to be the most effective one. Whether these guys were like, hey, the one that expresses the concept the most effectively will be the most effective one. Which one of these do you think is actually valuable in the long run? The one that's the closest translation to the Greek, which, shocker, High Romans spoke Greek, or the one that was able to translate it into an English comprehension that kept the emphasis of what was being said. I'll give you a hint. There you go. Alright, so moving on. Now, Dragon's Dogma looked at this and went, oh shoot, well, we better do that. So, there is this particular thing in Japanese games that tends to be a bit of a folly. Japanese games, when translated into English, tend to lose a particular element of lacquer. Lacquer meaning sort of verboseness in language. The people who made Dragon's Dogma realized this. They realized that Japanese just did not work effectively to translate the ideas they were trying to convey. So what did they do? Gee, they referenced these two suckers and immediately proposed that it would be important to resonate the language necessary to translate effectively the kind of expressions they were trying to convey through a language style that would most effectively portray it. They also utilized elements of George R.R. Martin's writings, but given that, as I have seen his work on Elden Ring, it is pretty clear and obvious that he was stealing from Tolkien anyways, so we might as well just say Tolkien. Thusly, we can conclude that Tolkien here was the inspiration for the language of whatever we call it, of Dragon's Dogma. Now, if, oh my gosh, I forgot a piece, hold on. If you are only familiar with the movies, then I got news for you, buddy. The movies are a different story, a good story, a very, very good story. One of the most wonderful pieces of classical cinema to date. However, it's a different story. Now, you might look at the Lord of the Rings movie dialogue. Hang on, let me move this into a place that it's annoying and right in front of you. There you go. Perfect. You may look at this. There you go. That's perfect. Look at that. It's so good and totally crooked. I love it. So you might look at this sucker and think, the Dragon's Dogma dialogue doesn't really resonate that particularly. However, if you look in Lord of the Rings has a lot more of a theatrical setting to it as a book. Let's see if I can find. I don't think I'm going to be able to find it. Oh, I did just find it. How about that? Lord of the Rings is very theatrical in nature, and if you watch a lot of the cutscenes or listen to a lot of the dialogue in Dragon's Dogma, it has a very synonymous function of theatrics to the people, the way they say it, what they're saying, etc. Now, let me pull up a line of dialogue from Dragon's Dogma real quick to show my point. What I have here in Lord of the Rings right now is the time in which Gandalf is trying to convince Frodo to head out and help get the ring to Rivendell. And in the movie, the dialogue is relatively choppy and instantaneous, as it needed to be to show a sense of urgency, whereas in the book, it went something like this. I really wish to destroy it, cried Frodo, or, well, to have it destroyed. I am not made for perilous quests. I wish I had never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen? Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf. You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, not for power or wisdom at any rate, but you have been chosen, and you must therefore use strength and heart and the wits you have. But I have so little of any of these things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring? No, cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. With that power, I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. His eyes flashed, and his face was lit as by a fire within. Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity for weakness. Oh, shut up. Stupid camera, thinking that it's boring. Turn on, do it. Turn up, there you go. Hey, focus. This is literature we're talking about. This is history, it's important. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me. He went to the window and drew aside the curtains and shutters. Sunlight streamed back again to the room. Sam passed along the path outside, whistling. And now, said the wizard, turning back to Frodo, the decision lies with you. But I will always help you. He laid his hand on Frodo's shoulder. I will help you bear this burden, as long as it is yours to bear. But we must do something soon. The enemy is moving. Let's compare that to an element of dialogue. I'm picking this at random. Let's see here. What is it? let's see here. This is a quote from the dragon who speaks to the main character, which is you. What is your purpose here, Arisen? The hour for turning back is past. The world will have its answer. You or me. Death or life beyond. This battle you have begun sits at the very heart of all creation. We are the axis about which the world turns, Arisen. Time itself flows with your footsteps. Yum, yum, yum. Where else can you find language like that in a video game with such purport? There's also another particular element of dialogue which I would much prefer to reference, but I'll just explain it to you. Get out of here. The book. Notice how the scene in which Frodo and Gandalf are discussing the fate of the ring. When Frodo says, "Here, you take it," Gandalf stands up with this immediate, "Oh no," and he points, he's like, "No, don't do this to me. No, thou shalt not. How darest thee?" Meanwhile, there is a scene that has a very similar element of theatrics expressed that is very good as a token child to convey it, in which there is a woman named Mercedes who is going against someone whose name I forget, but he's a Crimson Knight, the Paladin. He's got a face mask on. He's got a face mask on, and he sort of reveals himself to be a guy who did some bad stuff. He intentionally started a civil war while everybody is trying to fight the dragon, because why the heck not? It's the perfect opportunity to try and seize power while everybody else is trying to focus on this bigger problem, which he doesn't really see as a problem in the first place. So, you have this guy that's acting like a big old bad guy walking around with this ginormous mace and shield in hand, taunting this poor little princess woman who is trying her best to stand up as though she's a holy knight just like everybody else, with this rapier, poking it in his direction. He's speaking as though oh, you are nothing but a tiny little girl. The best you could do is be courtship for my soldiers in the night. And she is appalled. She's like, "You will retract those words, sir." Which is to my next point, and probably one of my most biased points. I'm not a huge fan of smut. Now, in context to this, sexual content in a story, by definition, will always make it a lesser story than what it's capable of. If elements like that, whether they be things like simple conceptual tropes such as libido or whatever you call it, or obsessive sympathy, oh no, I have a toiling disease, and you should feel sorry for me, or something like that. Things of that element immediately make a story no greater than those elements exclusively. It can never supersede those elements. Dragon's Dogma doesn't do that. But it still references it, and it references it in such a very tasteful and respectable manner, which makes it so that you yourself as the player does not have to divulge or lower yourself to a perspective of utilizing these things as a concept which will progress your story forward or the story forward in general. However, it is reference that is occurring, and that's enough. It didn't need to portray or expose anything. It just, there are 3 in particular scenes in which scandalous things are referenced but not directly exposed, and it makes it so that the story, while still exposing a sort of sense of mature circumstance that's happening in the background does not force the player to be witness to it. Um, 3 instances. One instance is as follows. There is a character called Madeline. Madeline is this wandering trader. She goes from place to place, pretty much using her looks as a vehicle to keep her wallet full. Now, she doesn't actually sell her body. She just tries to get the sympathy of others by being cute and pretty. Fortunately, the main character... You know what? Hold on, I wasn't finished with the language bit. The language bit is so very important and so very valuable and completely gets, denoted and devalued in everything that people try and convey. It's like, oh man, I don't understand this language stuff. It's so confusing. It's like, what? Are you gonna listen to The Witcher and say that, oh, that dialogue is so great. That dialogue is crap. It's so bad. And not just so bad, it's so cheap. It's not valuable. There's no weight to what anyone is saying. How could you possibly compare the two? It's silly and ridiculous. You can't do it. Language is important, and the ability to understand language is also important. And it's like there are so many other oops, hold on. I've been spited because my oh, all right, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Everything's perfectly fine. Nothing happened. Right. Language, the ability to express verbose language in such a illustrative way consistently was such a triumph for Dragon's Dogma that is so taken advantage of, expressing specifically for one particular reason. Dragon's Dogma was released around the same time that Skyrim was, and everybody looked at Skyrim and went, oh, that's the big one. Skyrim got all the attention as a pass-by garbage fantasy, while Dragon's Dogma was considered a clone, when Dragon's Dogma had been in the works far longer and from far completely different inspirations than Skyrim. My goodness. Okay, let's go back to the sex thing. So, Madeline. Yes, there's a scene in which Madeline consorts with the guy with the giant mace, with the mask, that was talking shit to Mercedes, the other woman. And they're meeting in the middle of the night, and he's trying to get information from her and whatnot, and trying to also get artifacts from her. So she's clearly in the devil in the details. However, Madeline attempts to seduce this knight, and the knight brushes her away, but insinuates that she very much would have allowed him to take advantage of her if he decided to take that opportunity. Now, a second element of these scandalous circumstances is that there is a duke that rules over the land. You might as well call him a king, but here, we're not stupid. This is respecting culture, as opposed to, yes, there's a king. Yeah, in history, turns out that there were almost no kings. Kings were not really a thing in history for the most part. You can look at a handful of things and see that there were only a handful of kings. There were mostly dukes, vassals, things of that sort of nature. And the nomenclature, which this particular ruler is given, is duke. Rightfully so. And so, this duke recently had a wife who deceased, for reasons that are spoilers. Whereas he now gets a new wife from not France across the sea. Not France I refer to as not France because the place you're in is called Grancis, but it might as well be like the coast of England. Not France is this unnamed country across the ocean, but an alliance is made between these two countries, and it is sealed by the Duke marrying a Duchess from this other country that is not France, but might as well be. However, this French Duchess is in a new land in an assigned marriage and has, desires of her own. You meet her, and she tries to seduce you. But before she can, she actually doesn't. Because it can be interpreted both ways, and in which she invites you into her room at the top tower of the castle in the middle of the night, and she's delighted to see you. Now, the circumstances are not directly romantic. They're just insinuated as romantic. But, as far as you're concerned, she might have just been legitimately lonely and wanted you to show up and visit her to, not be lonely anymore. But all the same, when you enter her room, she brushes her face aside and says, "Oh, you must think of me as a harlot for inviting a man into my quarters at such a late hour of night." To which, your character doesn't really know what to do. It's even funnier when your character's a woman. Actually, right, I forgot. She doesn't reference whether it's a man or a woman. She just references you. So, before anything can happen, the Duke enters into the Duchess's chamber and tries to choke her out, and you have to hide behind her dressing wall. You know how, like, in older places, they're used to or in some places, it's like a curtain where you dress behind, but it's like just a couple of panels. It was like that. You're hiding behind that while you watch the Duke choke out the Duchess. Basically because he's having PTSD from his old wife dying, because, spoilers, the reason that the wife originally died was because the Duke is an arisen like you, but he failed the test of the dragon and took riches and fame and wealth instead of his beloved. That's the moral contradiction, or the moral dilemma that the dragon gives you, which is, basically, will you attempt to slay me and save your beloved, the person you care about the most, or are you going to sacrifice your beloved and basically be immortal until the end of time? Which, you would assume isn't that big of a circumstance, given the heroic circumstance that your character's placed in. But once you hit the end of the game, you're like, wait a minute, that's actually a big deal. In fact, this character that's on the front of the art design works is one of the arisen that proposed a third option. It's from the DLC, in which there is a character, spoilers again, in which one of the arisen gets directed towards the dragon. Now, the dragon is the mentor of the current arisen, who is an arisen who failed. And furthermore, the arisen is then given a choice to sacrifice his beloved, which at that time was a servant of his, or to face the dragon. To which the arisen stated, "I would rather watch the entire world implode than to see either of these things come to fruition," because he didn't want to kill his master, and he didn't want his beloved to die. Unfortunately, that was actually an element of the bargain, which was feasible, and that is exactly what happened, and it twisted the world inside out, just as he demanded, which is fascinating and a cool thing to uncover as you're going through the DLC. Which was a point I was going to make next. Literature. Sex. I forgot expressing the third seductive point, which honestly I suddenly can't remember. But I don't think it's important either. I've proved my point with the first two. I'll conclude my point before I move on, in which mature elements were discussed and presented, but tastefully and respectfully, in a way that made it so you knew the mature things were going on, but mature things were not being taken advantage of as bait for more seducible audiences to just immediately be granted into. It maintained a higher respect for itself than just to step down and make their story no greater than the prospects that could have been involved in it. What an excellent way of doing things. Now, I do not remember where I was going to go with that. Let's see here. Dragon. So, you know what? I'm going to chit-chat with you guys for a hot minute. Hello there. Hello there, Haley. Nice to see you. Hello, Blazing Ham. Nice to see you as well. Yes, I'm spoiling the first. I am talking about this. I'm talking about Dragon's Dogma in its entirety and why it's the best game of all time. As you should. Yes, and as you mentioned, his servant was the old master servant. Exactly. My gosh. So there you go. Let's see here. Nice to see you. Welcome to my lecture. Did I miss anything? I did. The answer is that I did, but I don't... Of course I did. I've only gotten finished with the narrative element of things. Oh, I'm such a fool. So, I could discuss a lot more regarding the narrative of Dragon's Dogma. I need help, Dad. Can you tuck me in? Absolutely. I'm teaching a lecture on Dragon's Dogma. It'll help you sleep very well, I promise. So, Dragon's Dogma. I could expand a lot further on the narrative elements of Dragon's Dogma, but in short, to do the TLDR version, it prioritized its elements on the inside instead of the outside, the same way that Tolkien was able to perceive Beowulf, which Tolkien then utilized in his own works to create the Lord of the Rings. The way that Lord of the Rings was written had a very particular dialect in it, which the creators of Dragon's Dogma understood the value of and utilized to the highest degree. There were elements of multiple different cultures that got put together in a perfectly little wrapped bubble that made it so that they were able to exacerbate the most valuable parts effectively. The Japanese Shintoism and cycles logic, and the Frankish Norman Saxon, the olden world of logic and not fantasy, but logic and mysticism binding together as a singular concept. Actually, no, that's Roman. Right. The sort of the post-Roman stuff. So the post-Roman logic of the northern lands of Europe and the Shintoism cycle logic of Japan put together to create a wonderful Dragon's Dogma story. Elements of archaeology, anthropology were effectively discussed in the same way that someone would discover it were they to be exposed to it for the first time. And lastly, Dragon's Dogma as a story never lowered its own standards of regarding the content and context of those contents that it enveloped. So, moving on. That was just the narrative part. Let's move on to something like, I don't know. Let's see. Dragon's Dogma is a game, so we can move on to the gameplay. Dragon's Dogma is how do you explain it? Dragon's Dogma is good. Okay, how do I start this? I'm going to start this as follows. Dragon's Dogma. Did Did you ever play? Did anybody else here ever play Lord of the Rings: Return of the King on PlayStation 2? I don't have the box with me anymore, unfortunately, because I was a fool and never thought that it would be relevant to reference that game ever again. It did something life-changing for gaming back in the day. Combat was redefined by that game. However, to be fair, there was a game preceding it, Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, which initially designed that style of gameplay, but Lord of the Rings: Return of the King on PlayStation 2 and maybe Xbox, I don't remember, perfected it. It was exquisitely done. It was an introduction to a linear style of gameplay in which you go from place to place to place, utilizing side-scrolling style combos in order to fight effectively. But you're not in a side-scroller, you're in a complete 3D environment. Now, this made it so that the way that characters interacted with each other when fighting had a completely new element of customizability to it. As you're doing these combos, you can go from one combo and switch to another combo because they all started the same, etc., etc. It was the foundations for what later became the combat of Dragon's Dogma. Dragon's Dogma's combat is groundbreaking. I have never seen a game to this day that has been able to effectively utilize combat in a similar manner. Dragon's Dogma combat is from the same director as the guy who made Devil May Cry, as there are a lot of combinations, and Devil May Cry is inspired by Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. So, as you can see, the way that the combat is designed is that you have these combos, but they're not actually combos. They are pieces of a combo for most characters anyways. When it comes to like magic users and all that, magic users have like this one grand ability that they have to charge up for an extended period of time, and when they finally get the chance to do it, it obliterates the entire map. It's just fantastic. It's glorious in its own right. But as far as the hand-to-hand combat, which is the one that is far more difficult to effectively nail because it's so interactive, Dragon's Dogma does it with the most effectivity possible. Games like Assassin's Creed might have far more flashy and far more enjoyable to observe combat. However, that combat consists basically of attack, dodge, jump, and then like utilization of additional items. That's it. Dragon's Dogma instead has a combat system which effectively makes it so that you can create your own combos. The combos are yours to decide. You pick an assortment of, I think, 8 different move sets. 8 different moves. Technically 6, but 8. 8 different moves, which all come together to weave in and out of combat. You get to pick whichever ones start. You get to pick out whichever ones finish. You move. You want to maybe like start with like bashing your shield and then doing this swipey, and then jump up in the air and slash down. You can do that. Or you can start by stabbing, swipey, jump up, slash down, and then bash your shield. Or you can completely like pick a different weapon where you can like summon a little ball which is able to project magic missiles, and you're then able to stab a thing down in the ground, which then will constantly be shooting those magic missiles everywhere within enemies in that range. And then you can have one of your pawns, which is your servants. One of 3 servants you're able to summon, shoot things or slice things which are in this vicinity, which then makes it shoot so that more magic missiles are shooting. And then while you're doing that, you can take a massive mace and then you can literally like jump up in the air and collide into whatever it is you're trying to attack, which then will run through the little bull that's having all the magic missiles go through it. And So basically you're able to take combos and you're able to have those combos increase on themselves in any way that you see fit. Which is a combat style that I have never seen done before effectively to that same degree. Even games that originally were inspiration for Dragon's Dogma that had successors, for instance, Monster Hunter series, Monster Hunter World, its combo system does not even remotely compare to Dragon's Dogma. It is of the same style, of the same ideology, but does not take it remotely to the same level. Which then will bring me to the next element, Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter. In Monster Hunter World, there was this mechanic in which you could get onto the back of creatures and start swiping around. And it was seen as like this revolutionary concept. Guess who did it first and did it better? Dragon's Dogma. Because with Dragon's Dogma, you literally could just grab onto any part of the larger creatures and just start beating the snot out of them wherever you are. You didn't have these 3 nodes that you had to choose: the head, the body, the tail. No. You could pick anywhere that you wanted to just grab a hold on for dear life as long as your stamina would let you, and then just beat the crap out of it. If you had enough stamina and if you had enough time, and if you didn't get thrown off, you could literally crawl to the face of this thing and just start bashing in the eye. Whether it be a dragon, ogre, cyclops, griffins, all these ginormous creatures that you could actually climb on as if, which is a thing that you would assume would be something that, would be like available in all games. But no, it's like Shadow of the Colossus came up with it first, and then Dragon's Dogma expanded upon it, because with Shadow of the Colossus, there was one tiny little part that you had to stab on the Colossus, and if you stabbed anything else, then you didn't do anything. It didn't matter. But with Dragon's Dogma, these are full able-bodied creatures, and these full able-bodied creatures have all sorts of positions and weaknesses that were synonymous with all these different parts of their bodies. If you jump onto the back of the leg of a cyclops or something, a giant cyclops, and start slashing at it, oh no, you hit it in the leg, it trips and falls over. Which then its head is closer to the ground, which then you can run over to its head, grab its head, and as you're holding its tusks, you can just start jabbing its eyes out. In what kind of other game are you capable of having combat like that when it comes to like the larger bosses? Oh my goodness. Simultaneously with other enemies, when you start getting into the Dark Arisen DLC and you start working through the lower levels of the Bitter Black Isle. When you start going to the lower levels of the Bitter Black Isle, you'll sometimes find all these pawns that are, if you have the correct, if you are on hard mode, these very strong pawns, or like 3 or 4 of these ghost knights, which then will utilize the exact same combo system that you use on them on you, and it's an actual battle. And oh my goodness, it's just when a game is capable of taking your exact same play style and then utilizing it against you, it almost always makes it so that combat is more difficult. Dark Souls is an excellent example of this, in which some of the bosses or some of the enemies are just versions of you, the player, with the exact same skill set. Oh, shut up. Okay, fine, I won't talk about Dark Souls, because you see, Dark Souls, though a great game in its own right, and utilizes the same sort of foundation of value and whatnot, still does not compare to Dragon's Dogma because of 2 reasons. One, language, as previously stated. If you compare the 2 language barriers, Dragon's Dogma language compared to Dark Souls language, Dark Souls language is modern fantastical. When translated, while still fun and enjoyable to interpret, did not compare to the same research delved necessary to have such an iconic uniqueness to it, I guess. And secondly, what was the name of the Dark Souls maker? Was it Hidetaka? Miyazaki? Dark Souls director. Hidetaka Miyazaki. Yes, it was him. Okay, so Hidetaka Miyazaki, his inspiration for Dark Souls was the fantasy novels that he read as a child, which were in English, but he did not speak English or read English very well. So he had to sort of make his own inferences as to what was going on in the story that didn't always add up to what was actually happening, which, as I spoke previously regarding the narrative of Dragon's Dogma, is this sort of game of cultural telephone that happens in which information gets lost and rehashed over time. His ability to take that sort of inspiration of not understanding what was actually going on and then taking those stories that he thought were actually going on and using that as the inspiration, very well done. But all done by one person, compared to Dragon's Dogma, which was done by multitudes of teams of people. Which made it so that a team in itself had that happen, and then another team, which the team was associated with, had that happen between the two teams, and then I think it sort of ultimately came up to either 3 or 4, maybe technically 5 teams, depending on who you ask, who had this game of telephone occur, which made it so that everyone made sure that they prioritized what they prioritized most, but then as those prioritizations got it's like taking something through Google Translate over and over again through like 4 or 5 different languages, and then bringing it back and then coming up with something entirely different than what you could have come up with at the beginning. Like I said, Dragon's Dogma was initially supposed to be a Final Fantasy clone, and then it turned out into this instead. How delicious. Let's move on back to the gameplay and whatnot. And I'm going to explicitly discuss the UI. The UI system is groundbreaking in ways that is so taken for granted nowadays. During the time that Dragon's Dogma originally came out, which was, 2011? I think it was 2011. But 2012 for everybody else. If I'm not mistaken. 2012 for everyone else, yes. Okay, so when Dragon's Dogma initially came out, there was never a UI like it. But guess which game stole Dragon's Dogma UI? Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The item system from Legends of Zelda: Breath of the Wild and the UI menus that were sort of created from that game were inspired, if not completely stolen, if not accidentally conspired by. You can never tell if oh, yes, the guys at Nintendo looked at Dragon's Dogma and said, yes, that one. Or did they go, let's come up with this, and then not realize that Dragon's Dogma came up with it first? One of the two. Which one is it? Who knows? Who cares? Dragon's Dogma did it first. The UI in Breath of the Wild is consistently comprehensible in a way that makes it so that you can pause the game and do whatever you need to while mid-combat, which is something that a lot of people criticize Breath of the Wild for, but ultimately could not help but use. And they could not help but use it, well, in a way that made sense. It worked. And that was important, because in Dragon's Dogma, you have a very similar way of having to access a menu mid-combat, do a thing, and then progress. However, one criticism and difference between Breath of the Wild and Dragon's Dogma is that during Dragon's Dogma combat, you need to pause sometimes, because it gets so intense. So constantly, you're having to juggle multiple enemies all over the place, or juggle one enemy that's constantly doing things over and over and over again that require you to get into this loop that you yourself aren't really able to consistently engage with, making it so that you need a break from all the panic and all the insanity that's going on. In comparison to Breath of the Wild, where, Breath of the Wild, you have one button to attack. Good. With Dragon's Dogma, you have, as I previously stated, the multitude of combat options and combo options. Speaking of which, the vocation system. Vocation meaning class system. Dragon's Dogma's class system is one of its most strongest elements as well, in which you don't get to just pick a class at the beginning of the game and then that's your class for the rest of the game. Oh no, it's not even something like Final Fantasy XII, which has an Ingram system, in which you can sort of select what the strengths of different characters are going to be. Oh no. In Dragon's Dogma, you get to pick which vocation or class you get to start with. And then you have to go through all of them if you want to have a character that's actually able to stand on its own 2 feet in the endgame. Which reminds me of a particular element that I completely glossed over. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI is the unsung classic of the Final Fantasy series. Everybody speaks about Final Fantasy VII, but Final Fantasy VII compared to Final Fantasy VI is garbage. While it was revolutionary for its time, while it is respected as a cultural phenomenon for its time, the comparative stories of Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII, 7 is a dumpster fire, whereas 6 is incredible. One of the things that 6, spoilers, was capable of doing effectively was basically making 2 games in one, where you think that you're going through the game, you think that you're solving all the world's problems, and then the main antagonist in Final Fantasy VI destroys the world anyways. Now let's go back to Dragon's Dogma, which took this concept into the modern era. Congratulations, you've finished the game, you defeated the dragon. The world is ending now. The cutscene that you get to enjoy from the world ending, because you defeated the dragon, the cycle has ended. And now that the cycle has ended, everything is sort of stagnating. Now that it's stagnating, the world is literally imploding. And it's all your fault, and now you have to solve that on top of killing the dragon. What a lovely end game. Brilliant. Now, speaking of elements in the game that just blow your mind, there was a particular scene, another scene, spoilers, in which a bunch of soldiers find a cockatrice. A big ol' griffin bird thing, but it's like the head of a turkey instead of an eagle. They bring it into the castle as a prize for the Duke to reward them. And it turns out, instead, that the cockatrice wasn't dead. But you don't know that, and neither did they, allegedly. They may have been in conspiration, or they might have been conspiring with people who wanted to see the Duke overthrown, blah blah blah, politics, which, speaking of which, politics. People that think that politics in games is boring is no. Again, a story is not about the enemy, it's not about the antagonist, it's about the people who have to deal with the circumstances that the antagonist puts upon them. A massive element of that is the decisions that people make, which people in power have to make bigger decisions. Politics. Shut up. So, this cockatrice comes alive in the castle, and the way that you find out is that you are called across a mountain range. And when you come to the other side of the mountain range, everyone doesn't know what you're talking about. It's like, what do you mean? We didn't call you. What are you talking about? And so then they're like, oh shoot, you need to go back to the castle right now. Something might be afoot. So you have to go back on this mountain range, and when you cross the mountain range, the castle is seen below. And as you sneak over the pass and the castle comes into view, this ginormous winged bird that like almost dwarfs the courtyard of the castle in comparison comparison is flapping its wings violently, just causing terror and mayhem from a distance. How many video games give you that sort of what in the world context of scale? Oh my goodness. Just beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, so UI, cockatrice, endgame. Right, open world. I have no transition for this, so imagine I'm transitioning. Something, open world. Let's talk about Breath of the Wild again. Notice how Breath of the Wild was praised for its massive open world. It's ginormous, open, empty, nothing inside of it world. Now, on a technical level, one of the reasons that game designers do this, making these ginormous worlds now, is because the open world sort of acts as a loading screen, in a manner of speaking, in which a position of interest and there are 2 points of interest are connected by this mass of space, which gives the engine enough time to load whatever it is you're going to from where you've been. So basically open worlds have replaced loading screens for the most part, which is why there are, a lot of games with these wide open spaces and nothing in them. So having this massive open world isn't actually that much of a triumph because it's also empty. Dragon's Dogma has an open world that is substantially smaller in comparison, but it is so dense. The density of Dragon's Dogma is phenomenal. I once again can implore you, I was able to expand an entire essay's worth of information regarding 1 second, 1 note of the first note that you hear when entering into the menu screen, the main menu screen opening up the game. The open world is a synonymous representation of that density. It just keeps on going. In which case, while the time it would take from you to go from one side of the world to the other would not be that much, the amount of stuff that would be there along the way is enough to make it so that that whole entire trip would take substantially, if not 3 or 4 times longer. Because the world, instead of being a world with, let's just put a thing here, let's put a thing there, let's just put a thing here and there, and then that's fine. No. Every single thing has its place. Down to the last mushroom. Let me say that again. The last mushroom has its place. Nothing is put in there just for kicks and giggles. Let's just put an item there because that's where an item would go. Let's put an item here where no. Every single element of what is in this world tells a story. Like you'll only find these types of mushrooms in these types of places, in this type of foliage, because these types of elements are able to grow with these type of elements, and these types of things are connected to these type of things. It just like these connections, just all mixed together in a way that, is synonymous with the way that scientists categorize things in the real world. Notice a lot of real world ties between Dragon's Dogma and science. You look at anthropology, you look at technically psychology, you look at archaeology, and now we're looking at something as ridiculous as botany. Botany. Gotta be kidding me. It's ridiculous, and I love it. Absolutely love it. So, as we can expand upon this, there is a position for everything in the world, in which there is, everything has its place, to the point which you can memorize it, because it's not too much that you can forget it, but it's just enough to keep you immersed in a world that doesn't feel like it has any boundaries. This could be synonymous with Dark Souls. Once again, tying it to Dark Souls. With Dark Souls 1 in particular, Dark Souls 1 is technically an open world, depending on who you ask. Metroidvania open world, meaning that it's a bunch of different paths that all interconnect and all that. But it's an interconnecting group of paths that you're designed to remember. In Dark Souls, there is no open world map. There's no no mini-map system. You have to remember where things are. And if you don't, that's on you. However, it makes it so that you're forced to memorize what goes on in every single segment of the map that you have to progress through. You have to know exactly where the enemies are, because in Dark Souls there's a lot of enemies that jump out at you. And that sort of logic where you're having to sort of compartmentalize the entire world of Dark Souls in your brain. Dragon's Dogma makes you do the same, but in an actual open world. Brilliance. Brilliance incarnate. I absolutely love it. Blazing Ham, they didn't have enough time to finish the whole world. You must be getting through to this place halfway. You should have heard the beginning of my lecture, buddy. The magic of it is that they weren't able to finish the world remotely, and yet they were able to consistently add everything that made it so that the world was not lost, but instead lost to time. They made the inability to finish the world as an archaeological point. That's the part that's so hard to explain to people, where it's like, oh, in the development process, they weren't able to finish it, so they really just gave us a chunk of what was supposed to be. No. The game of telephone. I'm not going through that entire lecture again just because somebody missed it going halfway through this thing going, actually, shut the fuck up. Alright, let's move on to where was I? Marcus Aurelius. That's not where I was after either. Combat. Open world. Hold on. Goodness, how in the world does Lindy Beige do this? He probably has like a bunch of notes. I'm just doing this off the cuff. Characters are cool, but I kind of expressed characters already, how they're Lord of the Rings-ish and theatrical. Combat. Pawns. Oh yeah, pawns are cool. But that's a whole time. What I'm trying to do to conclude is that the points that I'm trying to make are points that don't try and dive deep into the piece of Dragon's Dogma eisegetically, meaning that it only is able to defend itself with its own evidence. I'm trying to express things which can be then referenced by other things, because I could talk about Dragon's Dogma in itself all day long, and the progression of the story, and the value of the different elements and how they all connect, but what I want to do predominantly is express this from like an outside perspective of like, why is Dragon's Dogma great to anyone, as opposed to just people who would be more inclined to enjoy it. Let's see here. Because surely I didn't cover everything. There's no way that I did. Though I did cover all the parts that I remember that I prepared. Narrative. Because, again, the gameplay. One of the elements that I was trying to emphasize is that gameplay can be debated as a narrative vehicle, even in mechanics, which is brilliant. Thank you, Blazing Ham. Min-maxing. I will get to that right after I finish the statement. Whatever you call it. Even mechanics can be used as a vehicle for a narrative because they instruct you on the sort of boundaries of the world and the sort of logic that is approached in executing said world, which is sort of an idea that a lot of people tend not to connect, because the people that design mechanics and the people that design stories tend not to be the same people. And the people that do design one or the other usually miss a massive element of one or the other. People that design stories don't realize that the mechanics that they're making aren't sort of like exponentially adding to said story. And same thing with people who make mechanics. People who make mechanics tend to not realize that they're subtracting from the story. They make these things two separate things as opposed to one synonymous thing, one complete idea. One complete idea that negates min-maxing. So, as Blazing Ham thankfully reminded me, thank you, Blazing Ham, min-maxing is a thing that a lot of people do in a lot of games, in which an individual will see the stat blocks of a game and try and get the highest numbers possible in the most effective numbers possible. You can do this in Dark Souls, which makes it so that you're basically invincible, which makes it so that if anybody tries to fight you in multiplayer, you just destroy them, and it's not fun for anybody. And min-maxing is arguably a way to sort of break the game in a way that makes it so that you're not playing a game anymore. You're just being an accountant, crunching numbers and getting results. That's not how games work. Now, for some people, min-maxing is gaming, and winning is fun. To those people, get a life. Utilize those skills in stocks or something, and then do the other things with your life, you nonsensical narc. Min-maxing was completely negated in Dragon's Dogma. Now, how can you do that? How could you possibly do that? They did this with as follows. Those class systems that I referenced, the reason that you have to get levels in all of those different classes is because when it comes to the stats of your character, the stats of your character are determined by a lot of factors that you would not have expected. Height, weight, gender, etc. And another element is what levels you choose to level up your character in different classes. And it makes it so that whatever you come up with basically means that if you stick with a singular class and try and focus min-maxing that one class, you're missing out on so many other critical skills that you need your character to have in order to progress the game without having all sorts of whatever you call it. I completely lost my train of thought. It just went. I've been talking for too long. But genders. Yeah, exactly. But yeah. Stats meaning you can't wear. Yeah, exactly. Right. So one vocation, one class will give you a bunch of set skills. Now, no other classes have those set skills, but some of those set skills can transfer between. So if you, and some of those skills that you can transfer in between are necessary for other skills to be stronger, or other classes to be stronger. And so if you don't have those skills, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It doesn't matter what your stats are because you don't have the tools necessary to utilize those stats, which makes it so that you basically have to play the game where you go through every single class, regardless of which order, because there are some orders that increase your abilities in different ways. There are some ways that make it so that you feel stronger in specific ways, but there are actually some videos that are done which basically have characters that min-max and characters that don't. Some characters that are min-maxed are fantastic at doing one thing, and that's it. Now, there are some skills that are more utilizable throughout the game. However, there will still be roadblocks of this sort of rock, paper, scissors game of elements and types of armor and weapons, etc., the types of damage that are all negatable by something, which will make it so that when you're in a position that you're in the late game or later game or just going up against stronger enemies, regardless of how strong you are in one thing, it makes absolutely no difference if you're not prepared to deal with the stuff in the second, which is a big deal. Big deal. Goodest meme of all time. So yeah, Dragon's Dogma. Good game. Very good game from a narrative perspective, from a gameplay perspective, from a what do you call it? from a gameplay supporting the narrative perspective, I don't remember what the word is, but I'm sure that other people do, and you know what I'm talking about anyways. And conclusively, most importantly, I would like to argue that Dragon's Dogma is in fact a classic. Not in the sense of a gaming classic, because gaming classics are like Mario, Zelda, maybe Mass Effect, depending on who you ask, Halo, stuff like that. Dragon's Dogma, while arguably a video game classic, can at most really be discussed as maybe like a cult classic. Dragon's Dogma instead is a narrative classic, a literary classic, one that is able to withstand itself in a modern perspective with things like Lord of the Rings, Shakespeare, I was about to say Robert Downey Jr., Robinson Crusoe, Charles Dickens, those sorts of things, but taking it like a step further, like a book or a story of film can only go as far as its medium. A book cannot have gameplay elements. A movie cannot have gameplay elements, but a game can, which makes it so that a game can create an immersive experience that supersedes anything that comes before it, if done correctly. Now, with most games just haven't done that. Most games have sort of gone into another avenue of attempting to tell stories, utilizing gameplay in a way that doesn't really match literary classics, just because the sort of logic and perspective that are used are completely different and on their own level of stupid. Dragon's Dogma, on the other hand, respects said classics and accesses them to their fullest potential, making it so that Dragon's Dogma belongs on shelves, not with things like Mario and Halo, but instead with things like Lord of the Rings and A Tale of Two Cities. Which then brings me to my next thing. As of this recording, Dragon's Dogma 2 is currently in production. Fingers crossed, if I actually am able to succeed at my quest, I'm voice acting in that sucker. Because this is how much it means to me. And I am doing everything in my power to contact anyone that I can to get this voice, without the mask, obviously, into the game. So, you know, Capcom, if you're seeing this, which you're not, know that my appreciation is true and my concepts are genuine. And I do not speak as though some sort of dumb little kid that's, you know, having the audacity to say, Dragon's Dogma is your favorite game. I'm saying that Dragon's Dogma was able to bestow enough research to barely be summarized within this tiny little lecture. Well then, this transition didn't work at all. So, without further ado, I am going to play Dragon's Dogma and have my camera shut off at the perfect time. No greater time. Okay then, so, without further ado, go play Dragon's Dogma if you haven't. Maybe help me get into Dragon's Dogma 2 if you're cool. Or just wait for Dragon's Dogma 2 and I will splurge over it like a little child on Christmas morning, whether they give me a part in it or not. To be continued. I shall see you in the next one, Arisen.